Masechet Makkot, Daf Yod Dalid. On the previous daf, we saw a baraita that quoted 3 opinions about when one gets malkut. The first opinion that was the most stringent is that of Rabbi Ishmael. He thinks that one gets malkut even for mitot betin, someone's deserving of capital punishment, they get malkut also. And also if they get karet, they get malkut. And if it's just malkut, of course you get malkut. So Rabbi Ishmael says you always get malkut. Rabbi Akiva says no, if you're getting capital punishment, then you only get capital punishment. However, if it's a sin that is deserving of karet, then you get karet and also malkut. And then we had the third opinion, the most lenient. Rabbi Yitzchak omer hayave karetot bichlal hayu ולמה יסת כרת באחותו לדונו בחרת ולא במלכות. Rabbi Yitzchak said that one only gets lashes for something that is not chayav mitad betin and not karet. If it's chayav karet, then you only get karet and not lashes. So now the question is, what's his derivation? So Rabbi Yitzchak says the prohibitions that deserve karet are within a generality. If you look in Vayikra chapter 18, that lists a lot of the arayot. We can look at it right now. This is all the list of prohibited relations. And then at the end, it says, don't do any of these things because okay, so now we know that all of these are prohibited by karet. But then if we look 2 chapters later, says if someone sins with his sister, then that's also karet. But I already know that from Vayikra 18 that says karet for all of the prohibited relationships. So why do I need another pasuk to tell us something about sister in particular? So that's the question here. How come karet regarding one sister is given an exception, that it's specified when it's already included in the generality? And the answer is to teach us that person that sins in that way gets karet and karet only and not lashes. And once you learn it in that case for sister, then we generalize from that to all cases of any prohibition for which one is liable to karet. One gets only karet and not lashes. That is Rabbi Yitzchak's derivation. Ve'rabanan karet b'achoto lamali. Okay, now we turn the tables. We're going to be doing this for almost the whole daf today, turning the tables back and forth between Rabbi Yitzchak and the other sages. The other sages are Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva, who disagree. They think that you can get lashes for karet. You do get lashes for karet. You get karet and also lashes. So what are they going to do with this pasuk regarding achoto? Why is it extra? Why does it have to say for achoto one gets karet if I already know that from Vayikra 18? And the answer is lehalek uched Rabbi Yochanan damar Rabbi Yochanan shimasan kulam be'alem echad chayav al kol achat ve'achat. It teaches us that we should differentiate or divide, as Rabbi Yochanan taught. If someone violates all the prohibited relations in one period of forgetfulness. It doesn't have to be all of them. It could be just some of them, 2 of them, 3 of them. In one period of forgetfulness, he thought that he forgot this whole chapter of prohibited relations. And he then has relations with several of these people, his sister, aunt, whatever. Then he will, it's bishogeg. So he's going to have to bring korban chatat. The question is, how many korban chatats will he have to bring? And the answer is, he has to bring another offering for each and every violation that he made. We don't call this all one big violation of prohibited relations, and then since it's all in one lapse, so he only brings one korban for all of them. No, we don't say that. The pasuk regarding a sister specifies for a sister only, one gets karet. Since you have a pasuk just for her, so I know that prohibition stands alone, and just like that prohibition stands alone and requires its own korban chatat, so too all of the rest of the prohibited relations on the list stand alone, and one would require a korban chatat for each and every sin that one makes. Ve'Rabbi Yitzchak lechalek minaleh. Now surely Rabbi Yitzchak agrees with this law, so where does he derive it from? That you separate all of the prohibitions, or every relative is a separate prohibition and requires a separate korban chatat. What's his derivation? And the answer is nafkale me ve'el isha benidat tum'ata lechayev al kol isha ve'isha. In Vayikra 18, it says, and to a woman during the separation of her impurity. There's extra words here. It doesn't have to say ve'el isha. It could have just said ve'el nida, and so on. So why say ve'el isha? So this extra word comes to teach us that one will be liable to bring a korban chatat for each and every forbidden woman. And it doesn't matter if it's the same prohibition or different prohibitions, as we'll see in a minute. If someone has relations with, in one period of forgetfulness, with this nida and that nida, it's going to be multiple prohibitions, multiple korban chatats, or sister and aunt, and so on, is going to be multiple, because it says ve'el isha, for every single woman. It's good. So the Yitzchak agrees with that law of lechalek, but he has a different derivation. So now we turn the tables. How come the rabbis don't learn from this extra word ve'el isha benidat tum'ata? And the answer is inachiname. You know what they do? That is actually a better derivation. Okay, so forget what we said before about Rabbanan. So we're going to go baret that. Ve'ela karet achoto lamali. Back to that question. Indeed, why in Vayikra 20 does it say specifically that one gets karet for sleeping with achoto, if I already know that from the generality in Vayikra 18, lechayevo al achoto v'al achot aviv v'al achot imo, to say that someone is liable to bring 3 separate chatat offerings if he sins with his sister, and with his father's sister, and with his mother's sister, 2 different types of aunts. So I don't know, one might think that all these are related in a similar way, because they're all regarding sisters, his own sister or his father's sister or his mother's sister. So one might have thought that perhaps these are all considered one category, and even if one violates all 3, one only gets 1 punishment. So that's why it has to specify in Vayikra 20, sister alone, to say that, oh, that's its own punishment, and therefore these also are their own prohibitions, and one would have to bring 3 separate korbanot for them. Now we ask about that. Pishita hare gufin mechulakin, hare shemot mechulakin. You don't need a pasuk to tell me that. It's obvious. For after all, number one, there are 3 separate bodies. There's three separate women that one is sinning with. So it's 3 separate acts. That's number one. And also, it's 3 different prohibitions. These prohibitions are listed in 3 different pisukim. So obviously, these are 3 separate prohibitions, and then one has to bring 3 separate korban hatats. We don't need the pasuk about achoto to teach us that. אלא לחייבו על אחותו שהיא אחות אביו שהיא אחות אמו ואיך היא משכחת לה ברשיעה ברשיעה. Rather, what we meant here is that we're talking about that one is related to a single person in all these 3 ways. A man sleeps with a woman, and that woman is his sister, and also his paternal aunt, and also his maternal aunt. Now, how can you have such a thing? If you have a wicked person who's the son of a wicked person, who they both engage in all kinds of terrible incest. So here's the situation. If someone engages with his mother, and they have 2 daughters, and then he engages in intercourse with one of those daughters, and he has a son. And then that son engages with the other daughter, who is his half-sister through his father, as well as his father's half-sister and his mother's half-sister. For homework, you can make a family tree. Good luck with that. Anyway, if you go through this, you'll see that the person is in fact related to that woman in all 3 ways. And so one might have thought, since it's only one person, then one would require only 1 korban hatat. And that's why I need the pasuk regarding achoto to say that even though it's only 1 act with 1 person, because there are 3 prohibitions built in, because this person is related to her in 3 different ways, so the pasuk pasuk of Achoto says that's one separate prohibition, and just like this is a separate prohibition, so too the one about maternal aunt and the paternal aunt. So he has to bring 3 korban hatats, even though it was only one act with one person. Rabbi Yitzchak, surely he would agree with this law. How would he derive it, however? Because he already used the pasuk of Achot for his derivation, that one gets karet and karet only and not lashes. Nafkale mikal vachomer de Tanya. Amar Rabbi Akiva she'alti et Rabban Gamliel v'Rabbi Yoshua be'itliz shel maus or shel maum she'alchu likach behema l'mishte beno shel Rabban Gamliel haba al achoto she achot abiv she achot imo mahu eno chayav al kulan el achat o chayav al kol achat ve'achat. So Rabbi Yitzchak, he can learn it from a kal vachomer, and we have this kal vachomer from a tradition in the following Braita, where Rabbi Akiva says, I once asked Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yoshua in the meat market in the town of Emmaus. Here's Emmaus, even though spelled Emaum here. So this is a city not far from Yerushalayim. And they were there because they were buying an animal for the wedding feast of Rabban Gamliel's son. He was getting married, and so they're at the meat market going looking for an animal to buy for the wedding. And, what do you do while you're shopping for meat? Obviously, you talk about halachic questions, and this happens to be the question that Rabbi Akiva asked at that time. If someone has relations with his sister, and that person is also his paternal aunt and maternal aunt, as in the situation that we just described, what is the law? Would you say he is only liable to one korban hatat, and all this he did by mistake? Or do you say that he is liable for each and every prohibition, even though it's only one act with one woman? That was the question. Amru lo, and among Rabbi Yoshua who was with him, they answered him, Zo lo shamanu. Listen, we have no tradition about this case. It hasn't come up recently. Aval shamanu haba al chamesh nashim nidot behalem echad shechayav al kol achat ve'achat v'nir'in devarim mikal vachomer u'manida shehi shem echad v'chayav al kol achat ve'achat kan sheshelosha shemot lo kol sheken. However, we have heard a tradition about a case that we think is similar. If someone has relations with 5 different women, and each of the 5, they're all in nida, and it's all during one lapse of awareness, he forgot about this entire prohibition, and so he realized later, so it's bishogeg, he has to bring a korban chatat for every single one of those acts, 5 different korbanot. And it seems that one can make a kal vachomer. If nida, which is all one and the same prohibition, and yet one is liable for each and every act, even though they're all one prohibition, you might have thought, it's all one prohibition. I just did it a lot of times in one lapse of awareness. So maybe I should bring only one. You can compare it to Shabbat. In one lapse of awareness, I didn't realize that cooking is prohibited. And so I cooked something now, and then half hour later, and a half hour later, I cooked 5 different dishes, all within one lapse of awareness. It's the same melacha on the same Shabbat, on the same lapse of awareness. One would only bring one korban chatat. So I might have thought that, and yet the halacha is not so, that one has to bring 5, even though it's only one prohibition. So here, kan sheshelosha shemot lo kol sheken. In this case, where this man violated with this woman, and it's 3 different prohibitions built in because it's his sister and his aunt and his aunt both ways. So all the more so if when you violate one prohibition, it's the same name of a prohibition, nida, 5 times, one brings 5 korbanot. So all the more so here, where it's 5 different prohibitions, and so it would seem therefore yes, one has to bring 5 different ones. And the Rabbi Yitzchak says, I learned it from the kal vachomer that we learned from this tradition, so I don't need a pasuk. V'idach. Now the rabbis, how come they don't accept this tradition? Why do they have to go find a pasuk for this of achoto? Why can't they accept this kal vachomer? And the answer is kal vachomer perichahu malinida sheken gufin mechulakin. This kal vachomer is rejected. It's a problematic one because in the case of nida, these are 5 separate people that he had relations with. So obviously, it's 5 separate acts with 5 separate women. That's for sure going to be 5 korban hatats. That you can't compare that to this case where it's one act with only one woman, that happens to be 3 different prohibitions. You can't make a kal vachomer. There's a reason to say that the nidah case is more stringent because it's 5 different people. So therefore, the rabbis reject this kal vachomer. Ulidach nameh, and you know what? According to the Bi Yitzchak, also hay vadai kal vachomer perichahu. This is a refuted kal vachomer. This is not a basis. They were busy buying the meat on the market. They came up with a kal vachomer. Upon further reflection, the rabbis say, no, this is a refuted kal vachomer. So we're back to the question, how does it be Yitzchak know that in the case of the man with the woman who is his sister and his aunt, how does he know that you get 3? They have to bring 3 different korban hatats. Ela nafka le me achoto de sefa. He can learn it from the second instance of achoto. Right, here's the pasuk. It says asher yikach et achoto is here once, and then later on in the pasuk, ervat achoto gila avono yisa. So why does it have to say achoto twice? You could have just left this one out. And so he learns it from the second instance of achoto, that one is liable for 3 korbanot in that case of the man with one woman with 3 different prohibitions. Ve'idach achoto desefa lamali. Back to the rabbis. Why do they need the second instance of achoto? And the answer is lechayevo al achoto bat aviv u bat imo lomar she'en onshin min hadin. So the rabbis will say, okay, the first achoto is to teach us that you have to bring 3 korban hatats in the case of the man with the woman who's his sister and his aunt. And the second instance of achoto is to teach us that if someone has relations with his full sister, who is both from his father and from his mother, that one is liable to punishment, and we do not give punishment based on a kal vachomer. In other words, in this pasuk, it's curious. It says, "Yisher kach et achoto bat aviv or bat imo v'ra'ad ervata." So the Midrash says, well, I only know if it's his half-sister, then, right, only if half-sister paternally or maternally, then one would get a punishment of karet. But what if it's his full sister? Maybe, how would I know? So the pasukim say, achoto gila avono yisa. From the second one, we learn a full sister also. Now you're going to ask, can I learn that from a kal vachomer? If someone gets punished for being with his half sister, all the more so his full sister. Full sister is also a half sister. So why do you need this achoto? So actually, we learn from here the methodological rule that en onshin minadin. We do not give someone a punishment based on a kal vachomer. And you have to derive it from a pasuk explicitly. So we learn from the second achoto this very principle that en onshin min hadin. Okay, v'idach. Now back to the Bi Yitzchak. Where is he going to learn this principle from? That en onshin min hadin. Gamar onesh me'azhara. One answer is he will learn the punishment from the prohibition. Remember that every prohibition in the Torah has to be said twice, once regarding the what the punishment is, but you also need an azhara for it. And here there is an azhara back in Vayikra 18 that talks about a sister, and so that one is talking about a full sister, and since that one's talking about a full sister, so I can derive here that the full sister is also prohibited here. But why do I need to say it, since it already says a half sister? Oh, this comes to teach us that and onshin min hadin, so we can learn it from there. Or Rabbi Yitzchak says, I will derive it from the first instance of achoto, so we can use the first one. At this point, Rabbi Yitzchak uses all the aspects of this pasuk, from the fact that this pasuk says karet, and you don't have to say karet for sister, because we already know that from Vayikra 18. So he learns from the fact that it says sister gets karet, that one does not get lashes, one gets only karet and not lashes, and from here he derives to all other prohibitions of karet, and one gets karet and not lashes. That's the main thing he learns from this pasuk, from the fact that it says that there is karet. But the pasuk also mentions achoto twice, and so for the Rabbi Yitzchak, from the first one we learn en onshin min hadin. From the second one we learn the case of a man who's with a woman who is his sister and also his paternal aunt and maternal aunt, that he has to bring 3 korban hatat. So good. Rabbi Yitzchak derives something from every aspect of it. However, Rabbanan, from the entire pasuk, the fact that it says karet at all here, Rabbanan learn the case of the guy who's with his sister, who's also his aunt and his aunt. And then from the second achoto, he learns en onshin min hadin. However, Rabbanan still have not learned anything from the first instance of achoto. So that's the next question. V'idach, according to the rabbis, why do you need the first achoto? Hahu miba'ele lechalek karet lamfatem velasach. That is to learn that one gets karet for each of the two prohibitions, for creating anointing oil and also to applying it. There's special oil that's used in the Beit HaMikdash, and we mentioned in the Mishnah, one is not allowed to make or use such oil. The pasuk in Shemot says, a man who blends a mixture like it and who places any of it upon a non-priest, he shall be he gets karet. So you see that there are two actions, preparing it and also placing it. And so how do I know? Since it's in one pasuk and it only says karet one time for both of them, I might have thought that if someone prepares it and anoints someone with it, that would only be one prohibition, only one karet, or by mistake, only one korban. And therefore, this word, achoto, even though it's in a completely different context, but we do that if something is not relevant to its own context, and we have nothing else to learn here for about sisters, so we apply it to a different context, so just so that it would apply to the oil case, that one would be liable to two separate prohibitions for preparing it and for anointing someone with it, even though they're in one pasuk and it only says karet once. Good. Now, presumably, Rabbi Yitzchak would agree with this. So, v'idach, we had Rabbi Yitzchak know the case of oil. Sabad ke Rabbi Elazar amar Rabbi Hosha'aya, amar Rabbi Elazar amar Rabbi Hosha'aya. Kol makom she'ata moseh shenei lavin v'charet echad, chalukin hen lekorban. He might agree with Rabbi Elazar in the name of Rabbi Hosha'aya that anytime the Torah mentions two prohibitions and then only says karet one time, then we assume that they are separate prohibitions, and if one does both aspects of it, both prohibitions, then you have to bring two korban hatats. So we have a general rule about that, and therefore even without the word achoto or any other word, just having this pasuk by itself that says do not blend it, do not anoint it, or else one gets karet, so that's already two prohibitions. So I already know that would be two korban hatats, and therefore I don't need any other pasuk, so then that's all good. Or maybe they don't agree with Rabbi Hoshea, lo savar like Rabbi Elazar, but nevertheless he can answer a different way to Rabbi Yitzchak. In Vayikra 20, it says a man shall not be with a woman dava, means that she is afflicted. It's talking about nida, and they will get karet. So it says a punishment of karet. Now, why do I need that? Already in Vayikra 18, it says that someone that nida is prohibited, and at the bottom of that list, it says all the people on this list get karet. So why do I need this pasuk to say that someone who sleeps with a nida gets karet? So I already know that, so I don't need it for this context. So the Rabbi Yitzchak says, I will use this pasuk to teach me about this other context of oil. If someone prepares oil and anoints someone with it, they get karet twice, or they bring a korban hatat twice for those two separate prohibitions. Ve'idach, now back to the rabbis. What are they going to do with that pasuk about a nida that says dava? Hahumi ba'ele lechad Rabbi Yochanan, damar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, minayin she'ena isha temea ad she'yaseh madve derech ervata, shneimar ve'ish asher yishkab et isha dava ve'gila et ervata ve'gomer melamed she'ena isha temea ad she'yaseh madve derech ervata. We need that for the teaching of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. It says, how do you know that a woman does not become tameh as a nida until her blood of menstruation comes from her uterus, only from ervata? Only then is it considered dam nida. And how do we know that? Because it says ashish kabet isha dava, and that pasuk afflicted. So that we learn from there that it's only if it comes from madve, that it flows, it's discharged from. That's the root of the word, from derech ervata, and not if the blood comes from a different place. So the Rabbanan used that pasuk for something else. So in the end, everybody uses all the pasukim to learn one thing or another, and so we have balance, despite the fact that the Rabbi Yitzchak used that original pasuk of Achoto to teach that, I don't need to say Achoto gets karet, because I already know it from Vayikra 18. So the word karet in Vayikra 20 is extra to teach me that someone who gets karet does not get lashes. That's the main point of this whole exercise, the source for the Yitzchak, that someone who gets karet does not get lashes, as opposed to Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva who think that someone who gets karet also gets lashes. V'tameh shachal et hakodesh. The Mishnah continues and says that anyone who is tameh and eats sacrificial food gets lashes. There are various people that can eat sacrificial food, but they have to be tahor. If they're tameh, they get lashes. And Mishnah continues and says someone who's tameh who enters into the Bet HaMikdash also gets lashes. Bishlam ha'bal mikdash tameh ketiv onesh uchtiv azhara. Okay, we understand the source for the law that someone who comes to the Bet HaMikdash while they are tameh, they get lashes, because we have a pasuk that tells us the punishment, and we have another pasuk that tells us the warning. Onish tichtiv et mishkan Adonai timeh v'nichreta azhara ve'lo yitameu et machanehem. The prohibition with the punishment we learn from this pasuk, which is worthwhile looking inside. Someone who becomes tameh by touching a corpse and is not purified, et Mishkan Adonai Timeh, meaning if he comes into the Mishkan, then he will make the Mishkan Tameh. Obviously not if he's staying home, only if he comes to the Mishkan. V'nichreta nefshem Yisrael, and he gets karet. So there we go. We have the case and we have the punishment of karet. The continuation we're going to quote in a minute. So let's read it now. Kimeni daluzrak alav tameh ye'od tumato bo. His impurity is still upon him. This word tumato we're going to use for a gezer hashava in a few minutes. So that is the punishment, and we have an azhara that says lo yitameot machanehem, do not make impure their camp, and so that's referring to bringing tuma into the encampment, into the mishkan. So that law we understand we have two sources for. Ela tameh she'achalat hakodesh bishlama onesh ketib v'nefesh asher tochal basar mizevach hashelamim asher Adonai v'tumato alav v'nichreta ela azhara minayin. But this law here, that someone who's tameh who eats sacrificial food gets lashes, how do we know that? Well, I understand I have a source for the punishment, because the pasuk says any person who eats meat that is from zevach shelamim, offering that is supposed to be as holy to Hashem, and he is tameh, that person will get karet. There we go. We get karet, and then this Mishnah Rabbi Akiva who says that one gets lashes also. So we have the punishment, but where do we see a pasuk that will give us the basic prohibition? You always need two pasukim, prohibition and a punishment. Resh Lakish omer bechol kodesh lo tiga. We're going to see two answers. Resh Lakish says it's from this pasuk that says regarding all consecrated items, she shall not touch. We're talking about a woman after she gives birth to a child. She is tameh. She cannot eat kodesh. And so kodesh, Resh Lakish's understanding to mean sacrifices. And not, although it says don't touch here, but right now we're assuming that don't touch means don't touch and eat. But the Gemara is going to discuss this in a minute, because maybe don't touch only means don't touch and not eating. Okay, so right now Shakish says this is eating. So there you go. There's the prohibition, and here's the punishment about someone tameh eating sacrificial food. Rabbi Yochanan Omer, Taneh bardela atya tumato ketib hacha vetumato ala v'nichreta. וכתיבתם תמהיה עוד טומאתו בו, מה להלן עונש ואזהרה, אף כאן עונש ואזהרה. Rabbi Yochanan says, in the name of Bardela, that teaches the following, Gezer HaShava, from the word tumato and tumato. It says here, tumato ala v'nichreta. That's the pasuk that we just mentioned over here regarding the punishment for anyone who eats sacrificial food, tumato ala v'nichreta. Okay, so we have that pasuk that tells us the punishment, and it also says in the pasuk that we quoted regarding entering the Bet HaMikdash, or tumato tobo. That's over here, od tuma tobo. And since we know that entering into the mikdash, we just said, has both a punishment and an azhara, has a warning, and there's a gezerah shava between these two prohibitions from the word tuma, so therefore I can use the gezerah shava to pull those Pesukim here to this context, just like regarding entering the temple, we have both Pesukim, so too over here, although we have only a Pasuk for the punishment, but that Pasuk for the punishment has the word Tumah, and that the word Tumah can make a Gezerah Shavah to the other context, and there through that Gezerah Shavah, we can find an Azhara as well. So that's Rabbi Yochanan's answer. Bishlama Resh Lakish lo amar ki Rabbi Yochanan Gezerah Shavah la gamir. We understand why Resh Lakish would not accept Rabbi Yochanan's answer, because he doesn't have a tradition of that Gezerah Shavah. In order to accept a Gezerah Shavah, you have to have a tradition. He doesn't think this is a traditional one. He doesn't accept it. Ela Rabbi Yochanan mai ta'ama lo amar ki Resh Lakish. Why doesn't Rabbi Yochanan agree with Resh Lakish's answer? After all, he had a pasuk, Bechol Kodesh lo tiga. And so he said, this Kodesh means sacrifices, and he said tiga means eating. And so what's wrong with that? And Rabbi Yochanan says, no, that is talking about teruma. It says, Bechol Kodesh lo tiga. Kodesh, what does Kodesh refer to? The Shakish assumed it was talking about korbanot, but teruma is also holy. So maybe it's referring to teruma. One cannot eat teruma in a state of tum'ah. So therefore, Rabbi Yochanan does not agree with Resh Lakish's derivation of using that pasuk. Okay, turn the tables. Resh Lakish, where will you derive a prohibition against eating teruma while tameh if you're not using that pasuk? Nafkale me ish mizer Aharon vehu sarua ozab ezehu davar shu shaveh bezaro shel Aharon have omer zo teruma. He's going from this pasuk in Vayikra that says any person from the lineage of Aharon, descendants of Aharon. Since he uses this, Zer Aharon, that means all Zer Aharon, men and women. If they have sarat or a zav, then they cannot partake of sacred food until he is pure. Now, what is something that only Kohanim can eat, but all descendants of Aharon can eat, men and women? It's not sacrificial food, because sacrifices can only be eaten by males. In the Mikdash, like Korban Hatat, that the male Kohanim can eat, but that would not apply to women. So this pasuk that says Mi Zer Aharon, and that includes women, can't be talking about sacrificial food. Rather, must be talking about teruma, where Bat Kohen also can eat teruma. And here we have a prohibition against eating teruma. So there you go. Resh Lakish says, I have another pasuk to tell me about teruma. V'idach Rabbi Yochanan. What are you going to do with this pasuk? And he says, Ahul achila v'ha'alin gi'ah. I agree. That pasuk is in fact talking about teruma. I have no problem with that. But this one's only talking about eating, Shorazav, who partakes of and eats of sacrificial food. So I need this for eating. Whereas the pasuk that Resh Lakish quoted before, that says lo tiga. And according to Rabbi Yochanan, lo tiga, don't touch, means don't touch. And Kodesh here, according to Rabbi Yochanan, means teruma also. Unlike Resh Lakish, who reads Kodesh here as sacrifices, Rabbi Yochanan says, this is teruma, and it says don't touch. And so Rabbi Yochanan says, I have a separate prohibition, one for don't touch teruma while you're tameh, because you're not allowed to make it tameh. And the other one, that one cannot eat it while one is tameh. So now we ask next, Resh Lakish, Hai bechol kodesh lo tiga lehachi hu da'ata. Now Resh Lakish recorded that pasuk before as an azhara for not eating kodesh. Is that true that he really uses that pasuk, lo bechol kodesh lo tiga, for eating sacrifices while tameh? Resh Lakish himself uses this pasuk to teach that you cannot touch a sacrifice while tameh. Ti'itmar, tameh shenaga b'kodesh, Resh Lakish omer lokeh, Rabbi Yochanan omer eno lokeh. Resh Lakish omer lokeh b'chol kodesh lo tiga. Rabbi Yochanan omer en lokeh, hu hazara l'truma hu de'ata. As we have a machloket regarding someone who's tameh, who touches a sacrifice, Resh Lakish says he gets lashes. Rabbi Yochanan says he does not get lashes. Rabbi Yochanan says he gets lashes because the pasuk says b'chol kodesh lo tiga. You see, Resh Lakish himself used this very pasuk to talk about touching sacrifices while tameh, not eating. And the Yochanan, he doesn't need this pasuk at all because he thinks that someone who just touches a sacrifice while tameh does not get lashes. Instead, what does Yochanan do with this pasuk? Well, he already mentioned, he says kodesh here is not talking about sacrifices, but for terumah. And from this he derives a prohibition against touching terumah. Good. So now we have a problem with Resh Lakish. How could he say before that B'chol Kodesh Lo Tiga is teaching us an azhara for eating Kodesh, eating sacrifices, when here it means it's a prohibition against touching sacrifices? And the answer is Tameh shenagat b'Kodesh midapek yedach hamana b'lshon negi'ah. Azhara la'ochel itkush Kodesh la'mikdash. So Resh Lakish says, I can learn two things from this very same pasuk. One, that a Tameh person cannot touch Kodesh from the fact that the Torah uses the word nigi'ah, bechol kodesh lo tiga, period. Okay, so now I know one gets lashes if one touches it. And the prohibition for eating kodesh, I learned that because of the continuation of the pasuk. Here's the pasuk inside, bechol kodesh lo tiga ve'la mikdash lo tavo, talking about a woman who recently gave birth and she is tameh. So the Shakish says, I learned from this, kol kodesh lo tiga, that she cannot touch, anyone who's tameh cannot touch a sacrifice, and happens to be back to back with Vela Mikdash Lo Tavo. It's not clear how we learn from this back-to-back prohibitions that one cannot eat sacrificial food. The Gemara in a few minutes will bring a Beraita that will explain how we learn from Vela Mikdash Lo Tavo that also one cannot eat it. But anyway, he's going to learn it from there. Va'kate lahachi hudata hahu miba'ele letameh shachal besar kodesh lifnei zirikat damim ditmar tameh shachal besar kodesh lifnei zirikat damim. Resh Lakish omer lokeh, Rabbi Yochanan omer eno lokeh. The Gemara asks, hold on, according to Resh Lakish, is that really what the pasuk Bechol Kodesh Lo Tiga come to teach? To teach that one cannot touch or eat a sacrificial food when one is tameh? Is it really coming to teach that? Doesn't Resh Lakish himself need it for a different case of someone who's tameh, who eats sacrificial food before the sprinkling of the blood? Generally, when you bring a sacrifice, you want to kill the animal, bring the blood, pour the blood on, sprinkle the blood on the mizbeach, and only then, if it's tahor, only then can one partake of the meat. That is the right order. Now, if it's before the blood is sprinkled, even if someone is tahor, they cannot partake of the meat before the blood is sprinkled. It's not yet done. It's not yet ready before the blood is sprinkled. You didn't yet use the animal for atonement such that now you could eat the meat. So that's prohibited even for a tahor person. Now, if someone is tameh, interestingly, it's actually worse for a tameh person to eat the meat after the blood is sprinkled than before. Even though for a tahor person cannot eat the meat before it's sprinkled, the blood is sprinkled, but he may eat it after the blood is sprinkled. So the blood is machshir, it makes the meat available to eat. But if someone is tameh and eats it after the blood is sprinkled, that's when it's officially a korban that one could eat when tahor. If tameh and you do that, then that is chayav karet. But the Pesukim only talk about that case after the blood is sprinkled. However, before the blood is sprinkled, if someone is tameh, it's prohibited, but there is no prohibition of karet, interestingly, in that case. And now there is a machloket. If someone tameh eats sacrificial meat before the blood is sprinkled, while everybody agrees there's no karet, is there even lashes? That is a machloket that we read about now. A tameh person who eats sacrificial food before the blood is sprinkled, Resh Lakish says he doesn't get karet, but he does get lashes. And Yochanan says, no, it's not yet officially a sacrifice, so he doesn't even get lashes just at that point. Now, how does he know? Resh Lakish omer lokeh bechol kodesh lo tiga lo shena lifnei zirika velo shena leachar zirika. Resh Lakish says that someone who eats from sacrificial food before the blood is sprinkled does get lashes, and he quotes this very pasuk, bechol kodesh, any sacrificial food one shall not touch, and he says this is referring to eating, and it doesn't matter whether it's before the blood was sprinkled or after the blood was sprinkled. So you see that Lakish is using this pasuk to teach me regarding eating of sacrificial food while tameh before the blood is sprinkled. So he needs it for that. After the blood is sprinkled, we're going to see in a second over here, that's dependent on it being chayav karet. karet. And this prohibition is not chayav karet. So, Resh Lakish, if he's using it for this before the blood is sprinkled, where it's not chayav karet, then he's using it for that. And he can't use it also to teach me touching and eating the sacrificial food after the blood is sprinkled. So we have a problem that Shakish is using this pasuk for too many things. Now Rabbi Yochanan is okay because Rabbi Yochanan omer eno lokeh. He says you don't get lashes. Rabbi Yochanan ta'amed amar kera tumato v'chi ketiv tumato lachar zirikahu dichtiv. Remember back above, Rabbi Yochanan learned the prohibition of eating sacrificial food while tameh from a gezerah shava, from tumato and tumato. And in the context there, tumato is talking about after the blood was already sprinkled. Therefore, before the blood is sprinkled, there is no azhara, and therefore there is no malkut. So Rabbi Yochanan is totally fine and consistent. So back to Resh Lakish, how will he explain that we're using this pasuk for too many things? And the answer is, Hahi me bechol kodesh nafka. There's an extra word, an inclusive word, bechol. From that word bechol, we learn that even before you sprinkle the blood, if someone eats of that sacrificial meat while tameh, he will get lashes. Not karet, but he will get lashes. And that's from the word just bechol. And from the rest of the pasuk, we learn about eating and touching after the blood is sprinkled. And now finally we're going to get to that derivation that we made reference to a couple of times, but here it is. Tanya kivated Resh Lakish is a braita that supports Resh Lakish's reading that says Bechol kodesh lo tiga al sara la ochel. With regarding all sacrificial food, one should not touch, and this is the prohibition, the warning for eating such sacrificial food while tameh. Is it really about eating? Maybe it's just about touching. Touching and making it tameh. No, but look at the continuation of the pasuk that says, don't touch any sacrificial food, and don't come into the Bet HaMikdash while tameh. Makish kodesh למקדש. מה מקדש? דבר שיש בו נטילת נשמה. אף כל דבר שיש בו נטילת נשמה. והיא בנגיעה, מעיקר נטילת נשמה, אלא באכילה. So since it's juxtaposing these two laws, just like entering into mikdash while tameh is something that is liable to karet, of taking away life, cutting short life, that's karet. So too, the beginning of the pasuk must apply also to something that for which one is chayav karet. Now, what is that? What would be chayav karet? If it's just about touching, is one chayav karet for touching sacrificial food while tameh? No. While that's prohibited, it's not. There's no karet in that case. Rather, must be that the pasuk is talking about not only negiah, for sure it's talking about negiah because it says so. Bechol kodesh lo tiga. He uses the word tiga to teach me that that's prohibited, and one will get lashes for touching sacrificial food while tameh. But there's no prohibition of karet there. So the juxtaposition to entering into the mikdash, which is karet, tells me that there is another also a prohibition regarding eating sacrificial food while tameh, and that's something that would not only get lashes, not only get karet, but also lashes. We know the punishment already from the other pasuk. This pasuk will serve as the azhara for that prohibition. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.